Going live now, but we're going to put the intro on first. Hello, welcome to this live broadcast of the US presidential election show. Special day. We reported earlier on the key trends, but I think we've come to that moment in any campaign, in any election, and any counting process, that it is really possible now to call the election, even if some of the networks perhaps are still holding back. So it's great to have Ryan Hunter back on the show, and also welcome Bekki, and we'll come to you shortly. But firstly, Ryan, I'm sure our viewers want to know, are you able, you've crunched the numbers, you've been up for a couple of nights now, who do you feel has won this election?
Well, it's clearly Joe Biden. The only thing stopping the networks from calling the race is just the number of outstanding votes in Pennsylvania, which is something north of 150,000. That's probably the only reason why, but otherwise it's really hard to see how he doesn't maintain his new lead in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and let's make it crystal clear for our viewers. It's hard to track US politics from Europe. It's probably hard to track it in the US. With the states having different procedures, all these mail-in ballots, Trump being ahead in Pennsylvania, now he's behind. So just for the benefit of everyone maybe who doesn't follow US politics that closely, just walk us through why Trump appeared to be ahead when the election had finished in those early hours, and yet Trump now, you're confident, is actually going to win the election. What's happened? Just talk through very simply.
Well, Pennsylvania is a really perfect example for this, in that they were not allowed to count their mail-in ballots until Election Day, and after they've already counted their in-person ballots from Election Day. So what that created was a situation where, as they were counting the in-person ballots, which skewed heavily Republican, Donald Trump built up quite the lead. And we got to a situation where Trump's lead was even at times 600,000 votes, with 85% plus counted. And then they started counting the mail-in ballots, most of which came from heavily metropolitan areas and skewed very heavily towards Joe Biden. And as they've been releasing more and more votes, Trump's lead was diminishing, and over the last hour, Joe Biden finally took the lead with more votes left to count. And the only conclusion really being that his lead will be extending, not getting narrower.
Well, thanks for that. I mean, I think we can now be clear that you're saying basically Biden has won. Ryan, because of the nature of the way in which the votes came in and that they are counted. Perhaps we can bring in Bekki now. Bekki Zorn, a humanitarian advisor, member of Democrats Abroad. You're born in New York, Bekki, but you live here now in Brussels, and you've got experience of working internationally, Palestine, Ethiopia, Bangladesh, and Myanmar. Really great to have you on the show. Thank you for taking some time out of your busy schedule to join us. But Bekki, as a Democrat abroad, what's your reaction to what you've heard, what Ryan has just said?
Well, thank you for inviting me to join. I'm very happy to be here and happy to give a different perspective. I actually do agree with what Ryan has said. While I think people were feeling quite glum initially as the results came in, I think that you could see that the results were naturally a bit skewed because states like Florida and Ohio that counted mail-in ballots first were tilting towards the Democrat strongly, which was quite rare. Both of those states have been purple, so-called purple states in the past, but in recent years, I think they've both been moving more and more towards Republicans. So at least from my side, I always kept the hope, I kept the faith, and I didn't think that that Biden was going to be dismissed so early. And as the pundits have basically said, all the metropolitan votes are coming into from these big cities. Trump can say what he would like to say, but all the votes need to be counted. And when he was saying, stop the vote count, he was basically saying stop counting the votes entirely when those votes had already arrived before Election Day, a lot of them. It's just that they hadn't been counted quickly enough. The one other thing I want to say, which is quite interesting, is that Florida was the victim of election chaos in 2000. And since then, they really changed their voting process. And the votes have been counted very quickly. Whereas you look at these states like Pennsylvania, who knew they were going to have a huge amount of mail-in ballots, and they didn't correct the system the way that Florida did. So I do hope that this is a lesson for those states in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Bekki. And I guess one of your targets as a Democrat abroad was to see your candidate, Joe Biden, win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. They were the three key targets that you were hoping that he would win. It looks like now he's decisively won all three. It's been a long 4 years, but you must be feeling pretty excited now, relieved. I mean, what's going through in terms of your emotions now, looking at Biden has actually on what's been a very long journey for the Democrat Party, actually beaten Trump in those three key states and maybe some others too.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw a meme on the internet, or maybe it was an interview with a woman at the polls, and someone interviewed her and said, "How long have you been waiting to vote?" And she said 4 years. Yeah.
So it's been a very long time coming for some people for a very long 4 years. We lost you there slightly, Bekki. If you want to carry on what you were saying.
No problem. So it's been a very long 4 years, and I think people have been eager to vote, and people have been eager to change the system. Democrats Abroad here in Belgium encourages the estimated 11,000 Belgian voters to send their ballots and to ensure that they have a voice in the process. I think this year has been very difficult for the organization because it's just, with the COVID pandemic, been simply difficult to contact people. And so for that reason, people can't go onto university campuses and contact students who are studying abroad, or go to standard American hangouts and try to register Americans to vote. However, I think that Democrats abroad had a lot of fire in their bellies, so to say, and really wanted to get out the vote. And I think that they were successful. And that's true for the Democratic Party in the United States, too. They rallied the vote. The polling numbers show that. People went out, and it was a success.
Well, thank you for that analysis, and I'm sure also some of the other big numbers that Ryan might also confirm as well. Probably a record vote for a presidential candidate that Biden will have secured in terms of the vote numbers. A lot more votes than Biden nationally, which again, I think a lot of Europeans don't understand why it's so close when he has a margin nationally of millions of votes. Ryan, just want to walk us through that why is it that he's probably the most successful presidential candidate in history? You might want to confirm that, particularly
I think we lost Mark there.
Sorry about that. We're obviously a very busy time for the internet today globally, I'm sure. He's secured all these records, this record margin over Trump, and yet seemingly in the Electoral College, okay, you think he's won, but it's still going to be a lot closer than those national pictures, those national figures would suggest. Again, to the people that don't follow US politics, how can there be such a discrepancy between the national major margin Biden has, might be now 5, 6, 7%, very close to what the polls were saying actually, and yet it's close in states like Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, but also maybe even in Michigan and Pennsylvania?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is we don't elect presidents by popular vote, which was a big issue 4 years ago when Clinton beat Trump by 3 million votes and yet lost pretty handily in the Electoral College, which we've seen since then more calls for abolishing the Electoral College. Now, effectively, based on population, each state has a different number of Electoral College votes. It will come as no surprise, California is the biggest in that. And effectively, most states operate on whoever has the most votes on election day. It's a winner-take-all for the Electoral College. And so what we're seeing now and getting to 270, it depends on which candidate is ahead once all the votes are counted from election day and onwards. To answer your question about the difference between the national poll and the state polling, the easiest way to explain it is that, we're having 50 different elections. It's not one election overall. Each state has different rules, different timelines, different deadlines, as Bekki said, different procedures for counting votes, or mail-in votes, and so on. So whilst the national poll has been quite large for Biden, and he's been racking up a lot of support in states like California and so on, the state polls in the key battleground states have remained very tight. But I would counter one point, however. I would accept Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada will be tight. I think Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania looks tight by virtue of how late they're counting the biggest bunch of Democratic votes. I mean, Biden's margin, I haven't checked in a few hours, but Biden's margin in Michigan at some point today was 12 times the size of Trump's winning margin 4 years ago. So we shouldn't confuse the late counting for how tight this race is.
Okay, we're going to put up a graphic now. Yeah, and apologies to Bekki and me that is slightly obscuring our images. So this is a forecast, or now actually the prediction of the final result, essentially by Nat Cohn, who I'm sure many of us are very familiar with. Do you want to just talk us through this? So this is basically the final numbers, giving, I think, Biden well over 300 votes in the Electoral College. Do you want to just talk us through that map and why that is probably going to be the final map of this election?
Mainly because if you remove Nevada and Arizona and Georgia from that count, you still get Joe Biden above 270. So this is a prediction, if I'm not wrong, from Nick Cohn of the New York Times, who's gone ahead and assumed if that Biden will win the states he's ahead in, and that Trump will win the states that he's ahead in, which is North Carolina, which gets you to 306 electoral votes. Now, the game is getting to 270, so any cushion's nice. But with Pennsylvania alone, Joe Biden wins. So that's why it's nice to see, would be nice to see Joe Biden winning Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia as well. But the importance of this race is just getting to 270, but any cushion will be nice.
And that's a pretty reliable source, and that came from the New York Times, that he'll get 306. Bekki, a few weeks ago when the campaign proper started, although as you say, it for many people it's been a 4-year campaign. Is this what you were expecting? Again, many of us were so traumatized by 2016. It was very difficult to expect anything. On the other hand, some people were absolutely confident, given the pandemic in particular in the US and how that's been handled, that Biden would win by a large margin. So there's a variety of views. Where do you stand in terms of your expectations, Bekki, in relation to this election?
So funny enough, I actually did my own electoral college map 2 weeks ago, and I had Biden taking Wisconsin, Michigan, and Arizona. I actually had him dropping Pennsylvania and Georgia. Now, Arizona is a traditionally red state, but I think what people are forgetting is Kelly, the man who has won the Senate race, is a NASA astronaut and the husband of Gabby Giffords, who survived basically an assassination. She was shot in the head. And so I think he really bolstered that race, and his opponent, Martha McSally, is quite unpopular. She's run for the Senate twice, as far as I know, and she actually never won. She was only appointed to that seat when John McCain died. And so for me, Arizona always looked like it was heading towards Joe Biden's way, simply because the Senate seat was such a popular one for the Democrats. In the other states, I have to say that I am surprised. Although in Georgia, Stacey Abrams, who lost that gubernatorial seat 2 years ago, has really been canvassing the African-American vote there. And I am hopeful that when those 2 seats go to the Senate runoff, Democrats will put a lot of energy, a lot of ground game, and a lot of money in that state and get people out to vote to tie up the Senate. That would be absolutely crucial, and that would be a big, big win for the Democrats.
Thank you for that, Bekki. In fact, we'll come on to the Senate race in a bit, because it does actually complete the picture in terms of what a Biden presidency can do in the next 4 years, particularly how it affects Europe and also the world. I know we want to come on to that subject as well. But again, maybe Ryan, perhaps talk us through this. Again, we thought the Senate was a done deal. The election was held on the same day as the presidential elections. Now, as Bekki said, there's actually going to be another election in Georgia to determine actually the shape and the outcome of the Senate race. How did that happen?
Well, that's I'll come back to each state having their own rules. In Georgia, if a candidate does not get above 50%, it goes to a runoff. And in both races, one race was never going to get above 50% because it was a whole bunch of candidates. But in the other race, Perdue, the Republican incumbent, that's somewhere like 49.5 or 49.7 or something like that, just under that number. So what then is happening is you have 2 runoffs on January 5th in Georgia, and the fate of the Senate could be in those 2 seats. So all the money you've seen in this election cycle, all the surrogates you've seen are all going to be concentrated into one state, 2 races in January. And that could be really, really important for Joe Biden's agenda, for the Democrats' agenda, so on and so forth.
Okay. just want to wrap up really on the election. I'm sure we'll come back to it before we conclude the program. But just to wrap up for viewers who are just joining us now, in terms of any results coming in, Ryan, that may be updating the situation, particularly in Pennsylvania. But although you've called it for Biden, and I think, Bekki, you're satisfied that that's the case, that Biden will now win the presidency, in terms of that's the wishes of the American people expressed through the Electoral College. Of course, one man in the United States will not accept that result, and presumably President Trump will continue to maintain his position that the election's been stolen, that this is a fraudulent election. That's what he was claiming last night in his statement, and he's already pursuing a number of legal routes to seek redress, and as he put it, get the judges to decide what happens next and who is the next president. He said the judges will decide whether it's me or Joe. So Bekki, as an American, a Democrat abroad, I mean, how are you going to handle that challenge in the coming days and weeks, that Biden may well have won, but the president will not accept that result because of allegations of voting irregularities?
Well, honestly, I think that, Democrats have confidence in the system. And so I had just heard today that the military actually has now put more special protection on Joe Biden, and they've declared the area around his house a no-fly zone. And that's the way that the process works, quite frankly. The military will be behind the elected president, the man who won the Electoral College and got the most votes. And so for that reason, Trump can say what he wants, but the process is strong in the United States. And one thing I do have to say is that I understand why the media has been reporting that there could be potential violence, civil unrest, and these other issues. But at the same time, I think that people need to realize that the U.S. is a strong democracy. Our processes have functioned. Everything is in place now, and there will be a transition of power. And I have full confidence in that.
Well, that's very positive to hear. I think whatever side of the fence that you sit, it's always good that in a democracy we respect the decision of the people, and we congratulate the winner, but the loser should be magnanimous. And we'll hope that is the case in this election. But I think there's two important points there you made. One is the threats of public disorder on the streets, but also these allegations of fraud. Now, to be fair, Bekki, a lot of the American media have been trying to not whip up an emotional situation, and many citizens across the political divide, across the aisle, have been acting in a very responsible way, and I think that's true of many Democrats as well, who've been very restrained in their remarks and reactions so far. But also the media, for example, they pulled the plug yesterday when the president was making various unfounded allegations, and I think many of us again in Europe have never seen that you've got a head of state where basically he's muted by very respectable media outlets for making allegations because they've obviously judged the allegations have no substance, they have no foundation, there is no evidence for electoral fraud, let alone widespread electoral fraud. So maybe your comments there on how citizens are reacting in America, but also how the mainstream media is reacting, do you think? I think your view is that will continue and people will behave responsibly.
Absolutely. I mean, let's be honest. There is the fringe wing of Trump supporters, and there have already been a few incidences in the past few days with them, perhaps resulting to violence, but I don't think this is going to be widespread. And the other thing I would add is that you do see traditional strong supporters of the president now telling him to tone down his rhetoric too. It's only, again, those fringe advisors of the president, like I would say Rudy Giuliani, that are standing behind him and agreeing with what he said. So I do give credit to that aspect of the Republican Party. I think they have been criticized the past 4 years for falling in line when Trump lies and when he says ridiculous things. But I think now they realize that it's time to put the country before their party. And just to be fair, we're only talking about the presidency here, because if you look at the Senate and you look at the House, the Republicans still have a strong showing. And it's clear that the American people made a referendum on the president, not on the party. And so I think that is kind of the perspective of the Republicans right now, which is that Trump no longer should be president of the United States. And what he's saying right now is threatening to the United States, and it's not patriotic. But the vast majority of the Republican Party believes in the country.
Okay, well, that's good to hear. No doubt we'll come back to that point, but perhaps we'll just move on to the other races as well. I mean, we talked about Georgia, but the Senate race as a whole, and also that the House. Ryan, do you want to give us a quick update on the situation there, and then perhaps we'll look at it as a whole?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is what's going to be interesting in the, call it, post-game analysis for the election, in that from the top line race, looks very good with Joe Biden on track to win. But in terms of the Senate campaign and the House campaign, the conclusion has to be it's been pretty terrible for Democrats with regards to what the expectations were coming into the election. The expectation was that getting a Senate majority was going to happen. The question was how big of a majority. Now, getting any majority seems very tough at the moment. On the House, the expectation, and Fox News on election night said the Democrats were expected to increase their majority by 15 seats. They've actually ended up having their majority decreased. So it's really a weird situation, and a conclusion that I've drawn and others have drawn as well is that you have Republican voters who voted for Joe Biden but maintained their vote for a Congress that would be Republican, right? So what that tells me is that across some key states here, you have a desire for change of leadership, but not necessarily a desire for change of party running the Senate, and not a ringing endorsement for Democrats in the House either. So that leaves Joe Biden in a rather complicated space of trying to manage that. And we'll see where the Democrats land with regards to what happened. I think the polls may have misled them in terms of spending, but that's my own opinion. And also the Republicans have to realize Trump may have turned out lots of vote for the down ballot races, but not for himself where he needed them. So it's really, really kind of a weird conclusion to this race. And it's going to be amazing to see what either party does in reaction to it.
And just looking ahead, Ryan, I mean, that's going to be clearly, a very difficult situation for potentially Biden to take over the White House, but find that his program is blocked in the Senate. I mean, how do you see that panning out over the next few weeks and months? This is
where the two Georgia runoffs are going to be crucial, with regards to the Senate, right? If it's 50-50, then the vice president breaks any tie break, which, that's all you need for a quote unquote majority, right? If the Georgia seats don't go their way, Joe Biden will have to contend with a Republican Senate, most likely led by Mitch McConnell, and that's going to be tough to manage. We've seen even when Trump was president, he had issues with both houses of Congress being so opposed to one another. Throwing a different president in the mix, is that going to lead to different results? I think so personally, but it won't be easy. But Joe Biden has built his whole campaign on being able to walk across the aisle and hammer out a compromise agreement. Now that hurt him in the primaries, having that kind of background, but he's the perfect person to manage a Republican Senate, as well as having a progressive-leaning Democratic-run House.
And perhaps turning to you about that on that point, Bekki, about working across the aisle. Again, I think many of us on this side of the Atlantic observe with horror the growing polarization of American politics. And I've made this point to other Democrats in the last few weeks that almost whoever wins the election, whoever has won the election, looks like Biden's won the election, that will not heal the divide in American society that is then playing out in the Senate and the House races. And you're going to have potentially a difficult cohabitation situation albeit, as Ryan said, Biden might be very good about working across the aisle. Again, to look at this in a bit more detail, if we may, why do you think, Bekki, American society has become so polarized? Or is that just our perception? It's always, maybe your view is it's always been polarized.
No, I mean, I think this is something new that emerged with the Trump administration. In fact, to be fair, I have not lived in the United States during Donald Trump's 4 years in office. However, I have heard from friends and family how awful it has gotten in the country. And the fact that even during the election, one person, puts up a Biden sign and their neighbor puts up a Trump flag, and then they put up 4 Biden signs, and then their neighbor puts up 6 Trump flags, and it keeps going and going, and people are harsh to each other at the post office and the supermarket, and not afraid to yell at strangers, and these types of issues. And I think that's very troubling for the United States. I mean, absolutely, we've always been a divided country. I think our two-party system exacerbates that quite a bit, because it is either blue or red. There's not really much in the middle. But I think that people also have to be realistic, that if you want to preserve the United States, you have to start looking for a middle ground. I, as a Democrat, of course, have been very disgruntled and very unhappy the last 4 years. I do feel like the Supreme Court seat was stolen. My personal perception was that there needs to be changes in the Supreme Court. There was this debate about putting more than 9 justices on the court. I don't necessarily agree with that. I agree more with term limiting Supreme Court justices. But again, with a Republican Senate, I don't think that is going to happen. But anyway, there is anger on both sides, and I think that Joe Biden has to do a lot of healing. He will try his best. I think he needs to really whip up not only Republicans who have been abiding by the Trump rhetoric for so long, but also the far left wing of the Democratic Party, and to try to just find some common ground. People have their feelings on the squad, the so-called squad, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's group of 4 women. They're very polarizing figures, just like Donald Trump is. And I think those types of people in the House need to come together and follow the lead of people like Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer, who still abide by their liberal principles, but aren't afraid to reach across the aisle. And so I hope that precedent moves forward under the Biden administration. But quite frankly, I don't think that the United States can continue this way anymore. It's reached a really, really awful level. And this summer, with the Black Lives Matter protests, the COVID pandemic, and all these other things have shown that the U.S. is really at a breaking point, and it can't go any further than it has been now.
Well, some pretty dramatic analysis there, Bekki, that no doubt a Biden administration will have to try and address. As you say, it's not just the pandemic, but the anger, which was demonstrated through the Black Lives Matter campaign, that will no doubt continue. And of course, we haven't even mentioned the Supreme Court, where you quite rightly brought that up. That's another area of controversy. Perhaps we could just, in the second half of the program, just move on to European and international affairs, if we may, and maybe start with Ryan and move over to Bekki. The point about this program, as we're saying, Biden's won, so we're assuming there will be a Biden administration, notwithstanding the legal challenges and the uncertainty about the Senate. What do you think in terms of the headline? What does it really mean for Europe in the next 4 years? I think you've always cautioned us into not believing it just means a return to what it was like before under Obama, or in the good old days of Bill Clinton. You've always cautioned that that's not the case. Biden is not going to be a return to the past. It's going to be a different relationship, but maybe a more civilized one. So do you want to just outline, Ryan, whether you still believe that?
Yes, and I think Bekki was 100% correct. I think there's a interesting parallel between the domestic and the foreign policy issues here. That Trump is gone. and he will no longer be holding a match to the fire. The fire itself is not gone, right? The issues that Trump inherited and exacerbated are still there. And on the foreign policy side, I think Trump just accelerated some trends that were going to happen anyway, and resulted in blocs like the EU questioning how much it can rely on the U.S. And those aren't new questions. Those questions have been there for a while. But being faced with a president who is such a vocal opponent of everything the EU stands for, led them to try and answer these questions on a much quicker time scale than they were expecting. Granted, the EU is still struggling to find itself as a foreign policy actor, but it's starting to conclude that it has no other choice but to make itself less reliant on the US. And shifting a bit to the climate side, that's probably the biggest area where the EU could be a big player, and where it's looking to move beyond what the US can do. So Biden is inheriting a lot of issues in the foreign policy side. He's certainly more predictable, more rational. That's a big sigh of relief for the world. That have to be resolved, and they'll take time.
Thank you for that assessment of the impact of the election result on Europe, and we want to turn to the European and international impact as well. I hope I haven't frozen. Seems to be a lot of pressure on the internet today. But perhaps we can just pause for a moment and actually go over to the States. And it's a great pleasure to welcome back on the show one of our regular commentators, the Honorable Michael P. Meehan, the former Chief of Staff of the U.S. Senate and leading advisor to many senior U.S. politicians. And I know you've been heavily involved in this campaign, Michael, and we've done the thing that I think every show should do at some point and every commentator should do. We've declared Biden the winner ahead of some of the networks and ahead of the official process, I know, but that's what we think over here, this side of the channel, this side of the Atlantic. That's our assessment. Do you share that assessment? Biden has won.
Yeah, it looks like the margin's enough in enough of the states for him to get to the 270. So I think it's all done by the final count.
I mean, you must be personally exhausted, but relieved, because you've been predicting a Biden victory consistently, however tough things may have got. Your prediction was right, and it looks like he will secure sufficient votes in the Electoral College. Yes, and Biden will set a record for the most votes any American president's ever received either. So it's a high intensity interest in this election. Yeah, and I think the point, though, I think that concerns us, and Bekki raised it, but also Ryan's touched on it, is that we've seen maybe a less positive performance by the Democrats in the House elections, but also in particular in the Senate as well. So even if Biden wins, it's going to be a tough couple of years at least for a Biden administration, unless the Georgia vote goes more positively when they do the rerun. Is that how you see things? Well, are you disappointed by the Senate and the House race? I mean, I had high hopes, but for me they were realistic, because the states that came into play at the end of the election on the Senate side were states that Donald Trump won by double digits last time and this time. So to find that Donald Trump voter who then turns and votes for a Democratic senator, that is a very narrow sliver of people. And if he's winning by 10 and 12, I mean, in Kentucky, the Republican leader of the Senate, Trump got 63%. He got 58. So that was 5% went from him to the Democrat, not nearly enough to get the Democrat over 58. So they were hard states to get those Senate races. On the House side, Trump has his brand. Trump will have the second most votes in the history of American politics. He's just losing to Biden over it. So people come and vote for him, and he sort of transcends these political lines because people just stick with him. And so I think that you can see in all of those close Senate races, there's not much daylight between the Republican Senate number and the Trump number in a given state. And on the House side, they were up 40 seats.
like that's kind of the high watermark for in the 18 election, and they're probably giving back 5 or 8, which Trump wasn't on the ticket in 18, and we won them. And then when he gets back on the ticket, there's the districts that want to be for Trump anyway. So yes, divided government for sure.
Yeah. And in terms of forming an administration, I mean, maybe too early to tell, but I think on this show, we're very keen to see what the implications are for Europe and the world, Michael. Do you think we will see a change here? I mean, even an objective analysis would conclude that the Trump administration has been incredibly parochial, incredibly concerned about his agenda in the US and less concerned about the international agenda. Do you think that's going to change dramatically?
Dramatically, because the one thing that I mean, Biden is a worldview politician for 50 years. He was a vice president. You can look at the Obama administration, and most of what the Obama administration is, Joe Biden was a significant part of that. He will surround himself with people who have an international view of the world and will not be building walls and fences and stop talking and screaming at our allies. You'll see a wholesale change. You might not see a wholesale change on the U.S. domestic policy because of the nature of so much of foreign policy is completely in the purview of the president. So you will see it on your side of the pond in more ways than I'll see it sitting here in D.C.
Well, that's a pretty dramatic analysis and positive analysis there from Michael, and I think that will be a big thing for Europe and the world. I know Bekki Zorn from Democrats Abroad here in Brussels, you do a lot of work on the European and indeed the international arena, particularly in some of the challenging areas, parts of the world. You worked in Ethiopia, Palestine, Bangladesh, Myanmar, etc. You must be very positive hearing what Michael's saying, that we're going to see a president who has a worldview, who is willing to get stuck into some of those civil rights, human rights, environmental rights issues that we haven't seen American leadership on now for 4 years.
Absolutely. I mean, currently I work predominantly in Lebanon and Syria. And this morning I was just talking to my colleagues in Lebanon who said that they feel that the governmental issue in Lebanon is actually pending on the US election right now, because they feel that the United States could be such a positive influence in supporting the country rather than the Trump administration, where I don't feel that there is a lot of technical experience working with countries in crisis. Beyond that, the total disregard for international humanitarian law by the Trump administration has been appalling. You look at the lack of any type of pushback against China for the Uyghur situation is pretty appalling, as well as Hong Kong pulling out of the Paris Climate Accords. I mean, I could go on and on and on. And so, yeah, absolutely. For migrants and refugees, for people displaced by climate change, for any type of country in crisis right now, I feel that the Biden administration will be much stronger. I would say this, though, coming from working in Palestine, I do feel that Biden is quite conservative when it comes to Israeli-American relations. And that's one area that I do have concern, that I don't think the policy will change so substantially. But for other relationships, absolutely, Biden is not going to pander to dictators. He's going to try to strengthen the relationship with Europe. And I think that Europe and the United States need each other as China continues to grow and expand its influence globally. We need to be united in order to push back against China.
Well, absolutely. There's some sentiments there, I'm sure, that we'll be hearing a lot more about in the weeks and months to come. And I know Europe will be looking for a much stronger partner in terms of the transatlantic relationship. But going back to Michael, because I know you're pressed for time, we want to get back on the election count process. Just looking to that domestic agenda, though, if we may, because whilst we're hopeful, as you say, he's going to be a world view president, he's going to want to engage constructively, working with his partners to tackle some of the immense global challenges we have. My God, he's got a massive in tray, Michael, not just, of course, the normal day-to-day challenges that any major country faces, but you're in the middle of a pandemic there. And I think the number of deaths, sadly, is approaching 1,000 a day again. You've got protests like Black Lives Matters, many aggrieved people understandably wanting justice. You've got the climate change agenda that's perhaps been put on hold for 4 years, that presumably he needs to take some rapid decisions on in terms of energy policy, environmental policy. Wow, what a domestic agenda he's got, Michael. How do you think he's going to actually cope handling all that and at the same time make an impact on the world? Bearing in mind, normally a presidency, it is argued, is defined in the first 100 days.
Right. I think part of the challenge that he has is he's inherited, massive challenges, right? The pandemic, a recession, the Trump tax giveaway, there were trillions of dollars of U.S. debt. So there's not a lot of room to do a lot of the things that a Biden administration would want to get done. I hope, how about this? I hope that McConnell, the Republican leader, if he ends up remaining the Republican leader, and Biden can roll up their sleeves and work together. That's something that hasn't happened in decades here. But they both came to the Senate as young men, and now they're both old men in charge of the country. And one can hope that you could get to a better place where you can find a work in the middle. But it's not the Republicans' tendencies, even with a 51-seat majority, to work on compromise. And the challenges, and I think we've mentioned this on previous shows, is here the Senate, only a third of the Senate's up each time. The next class 2 years from now are places that Biden will have won in those states, and it'll be easier for Senate Democrats to do that. So McConnell won't want to put votes in front of them that'll make it hard for them to be reelected. So, because here the next election starts tomorrow, right? So I love the 5-week races that you have in some places in Europe. It's the 2-year ones are exhausting for me. So,
yeah. Well, I think they're exhausting for us as well. I mean, those of us who've been trying to follow the U.S. election, and we've been trying very hard, as you know, at LP Brussels, to do just that. It has been an exhausting roller coaster of a ride that, quite frankly, we're not used to. European campaigns tend to be a lot shorter. Once they're over, we get on what we would argue with the work of the administration or opposition. And we don't have this sort of constant election. However, constant election comes with benefits like accountability, transparency, and other benefits that you could argue is part of the American system. Perhaps come back to Bekki on that domestic agenda. But if you want to think about some of the international issues that we want to confront, but before we do that, just bring Ryan back in. I know you've been also looking at the results coming in, and I know, Michael, if you have to disappear, we hope you don't disappear. But if you do have to, we'll completely understand. We know you're in the middle of your a very busy day there. Ryan, any further developments as we move to the final stages of the program?
Biden's lead in Georgia just extended. Now it's 1,500 votes ahead of Trump, which is, I think we're very, very slowly going towards a conclusion we all know is going to happen.
It's like watching paint dry, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It looks pretty. It's just not done yet.
Yeah, it's just a question of which state gets called first and who calls it. That's all we're waiting for now. We can look at the votes coming very slowly from Pennsylvania, from Georgia. We're going to see votes coming in from Nevada soon as well. They're all going to be showing the same conclusion. As long as the outstanding vote is greater than the difference in lead, no network is going to necessarily call the race yet, but it's only a matter of time. Maybe we're 1-2 hours away from this race being officially called by the networks, I would say. Twitter's already called the race. I can tell you that.
Is that view, Mike? Is that your view too, Michael, that we're maybe a couple of hours from the networks officially calling the election?
Yeah, so the Nevada, which is expected to announce any minute now, and that would put those 6 votes would put Biden at 270 exactly on the races that have been called by most of the networks. And Pennsylvania's got about 125,000 votes still outstanding. So and Biden's been winning those with 90% of them. So, the more they report those, the more his lead should grow in that state. So if Pennsylvania's called, there's no path for Trump.
The only issue in Pennsylvania is that 35,000 of those votes are in Allegheny County, which is not going to count until 5 p.m. Pennsylvania time, when that's the deadline for post-election day ballots to arrive. So if we're down to those votes and the networks are waiting for them to be counted, we won't get a Pennsylvania call for a while. So I suspect if we get Nevada, this might call the race before Pennsylvania.
Yeah. Let's not even try and get into why they're not counting until.
Well, there is a funny. Sorry to jump in. There's a funny situation which happened because Fox News and AP called Arizona so early. They ended up being in a situation yesterday that I thought was quite funny, in the sense that they called Arizona. It gotten significantly tighter. There was a reporting error that made everyone feel quite uncomfortable about the early call. And it got to a point where Fox and AP couldn't call any more races, because any further race called on their behalf, they would have to also call the race. So they were kind of stuck in this weird limbo for a while, and I'm sure they were praying for Pennsylvania to get in ASAP, which looks to be the case. But CNN hasn't called Arizona, for example, and some outlets still haven't called it. So it's still a kind of a weird situation as to why Fox and AP called it so early.
Moving back to Bekki, if we may, you've done a lot of work internationally, but you're now based here in Brussels. I mean, any advice, any thoughts, hopes of how Europe should react to the verdict of the American people? I mean, would you like to see the Europeans stepping up to the plate more when it comes to transatlantic relationships? You could argue that they've been pretty indifferent to that, not just during the Trump administration, but indeed before. Europe's had its own issues and challenges as well. Could those two countries, those two continents rather, work more closely together under a Biden administration? In other words, does Europe need to do some of the heavy lifting to restore the transatlantic relationship?
Yeah, I think it can come from both sides. I mean, let's be very honest. There has been expanding nationalism in the United States, but there's also been expanding nationalism across the European Union. That can be seen in Brexit, that can be seen in the elections of all the right-wing leaders over the past few years. And so I think that the world, it's not just the United States, but the world is really coming to this forefront now. There are so many global issues that need to be tackled, and climate change is the biggest, and it's putting so much pressure on the global population. And I think that, as I mentioned earlier, actors like China are coming to the forefront now, and the United States and Europe need to join together and to go back to the principles that they've had for the past decades, standing up for international humanitarian law, defending human rights, protecting their people, and reducing the level of division and nationalism felt within their own countries and in between countries. And so I think that it is going to be difficult, but it's certainly feasible. And I do hope that by electing Biden, the United States is setting a precedent for these European countries to move back to a more moderate policy and to start bringing people together.
And on that note, good to see you. I agree with everything you said.
Thank you, Michael, so much for joining us. Join us in a few days' time in terms of what it all means for Europe and the world. But for now, Michael, as always, thanks for everything you've done for the show and joining us today.
Carry on.
Thank you. Just to carry on, Bekki, to say, one of the challenges, as you say, we face here in Europe is the rise of populism and nationalism. That's creating uncertainty for our democracies, our societies, our economies. Biden, and we've touched on this before in the show, managed to resonate with people that perhaps the Democrats haven't connected with before, people disaffected with the world around them, feeling uneasy about the uncertainty, the instability of change, the threat as they see it of globalization. Are there lessons to be learned here in the campaign that us Europeans can apply in European politics in terms of how we can reconnect, as you say, with many disaffected voters, be they, we've seen the rise of populism in Italy, Poland, Hungary, the UK with Brexit. This is a major challenge for the pro-Europeans here on the continent, but progressives generally. And in that context, I even mean the Christian Democrats, centre-right politicians, who've also lost ground to the populists as well. So any lessons for us here, Bekki, in terms of what we can do to strengthen the link with the ordinary citizen?
Absolutely. I mean, it's difficult. Well, let's say it has been difficult the last 4 years as an American to preach tolerance when it's been something that's been evaporating in the United States. But certainly as an American who grew up in New York and spent a tremendous amount of time in Washington, D.C., I was used to living in a multicultural environment where, quite frankly, we're all immigrants. And I do feel that Europe has a large immigration problem. And you speak to some people in Brussels or in other European cities, and they say, well, what do these people want? We let them in and we've given them assistance. What more do they want? Why won't they assimilate? For me, the main issue is livelihoods, jobs. And I think that Europe needs to do more and follow suit of the United States by having a robust economic market for the immigrant community where they're not discriminated against looking for jobs. And I think that by earning their own livelihood and paying for their own housing or whatever else they need, being in an integrated education system, that will bring people more into the fold. And I think this is a huge issue in Europe, and it's an area where, if we can forget about the last 4 years and some of the rhetoric, the United States has done quite a good job of integrating the immigrant population.
And that's going to be a huge challenge, of course, for the European Commission, the Parliament and the Council here, and indeed member state governments. That is exactly their agenda, the next generation EU, to try and heal some of these wounds, to build back better out of the pandemic and building more resilience to the system and making sure, in the phrase, no one is left behind. But it's a huge challenge. And I guess we've also got to be mindful that Trump and people of his views will not go away. And I guess this is also another fear we have, that we might have a 2 or 4 year window, but will the right, the populists, the nationalists in America come back even stronger? Or are you, as Democrat abroad, optimistic that Biden can be a game-changing president?
I'm optimistic. I would say that the thing that makes me the most optimistic is the millennial population, of which I am one. I think my generation is quite politically engaged and civically engaged. I actually saw an interview in Arizona at one of the universities with the head of the college Republicans. And he said that their #1 issue was climate change, which actually completely shocked me. I thought, oh, even young Republicans may not believe in the severity of climate change. But I think that they really are changing their mind. The young generation is going to push things a certain way in the United States. And not only the young generation, but also Latinos and African Americans. I think that the second and third generation Latino populations are much more engaged. I think that this election has shown the influence that NBA players, for example, can have on the young African Americans and inspiring them to get out into their communities and make a change and go and vote. And so I think that could change the United States. So I would be cautious to say this is a Biden effect. I don't think it is. I think it's a revolt against Trump. But I'm very optimistic about the future of the United States.
Okay, well, that's a very positive note to sort of end the program. But before we do end the program, and thank you so much, Bekki, for joining us and sharing with us your hopes for the future on the back of what looks like to be in the end, probably a decisive Biden victory.
Thank you. And if I can just add add one more thing. I would like to invite everyone to join Democrats Abroad. If you're a Democrat living anywhere in the world, you can go to democratsabroad.org, find the country where you're residing, and get plugged right into the network. It's not just encouraging people to vote. There are really interesting cultural events, political events. It's a really nice community of people. So I highly encourage everyone to join Democrats Abroad, if I can make that plug.
Thank you for that, Bekki, not missing an opportunity to pitch your organization's virtues. I know on this show we like to be bipartisan, and in fact our main mantra is for people to get involved in politics of whatever kind. Just get involved, get stuck in, and I'm sure, you know, if you want to go the Democrat route, of course we would encourage that, but really just getting involved in the political process is what it's all about.
There's also Republicans Abroad, so if you're a Republican, indeed, you can certainly join that.
Yeah. Thank you, Bekki. Final word from Ryan, a quick wrap-up conclusion. Has anything changed in the past hour, or are we still sticking and standing with our view? Biden has won.
No, I don't think anything is going to change the Biden has won view from my perspective. The leads keep expanding, but it's a good moment to pause and answer the question, okay, what are we waiting for, right? What's still outstanding? Could anything change? Why hasn't the race been called officially? That's because the outstanding vote in the states that will tip this one way or the other is greater than the lead either candidate has. In Pennsylvania, you still have north of 130,000 votes left to count, some of which, a big chunk of which, won't be counted until much later on tonight, our time. So if it comes down to that, Pennsylvania won't be called until we hear more from that Allegheny County, as I mentioned earlier. Even though votes come in from other counties and the lead for Biden keeps expanding, as long as we haven't heard from the big chunk of vote left, the networks won't call it. In Georgia, it's still vote trickling in. As I understand, there's no major source of vote left. It's just getting, Georgia's a big military state, so you have a lot of military ballots that need to be counted that won't come in necessarily for another few days. That's an important point to note there. And in Georgia, you also have a big, as in Pennsylvania, a big stack of what we call provisional ballots. These are ballots that were cast on election day, but due to an issue, either with your address didn't match your registration, maybe you had an ID issue, you cast a provisional ballot, they get separated. They're not counted yet until you resolve that issue with your supervisor of elections. So that's also a chunk of ballots that have yet to be counted as well. That normally is not big enough to swing an election, but it could be a sizable number nonetheless. And then we move to the West Coast with Nevada, as Michael said, due to announce a big chunk of results any minute from Clark County, the home of Las Vegas, which is the biggest chunk of votes in that state. It's also a big Democratic stronghold. Will those votes swing heavily Biden or not? If they do, I think we'll see a Nevada getting called, which could see the race being called depending on the networks, whether they call Arizona or not. And then Arizona, that's probably Trump's best bet to reclaim the lead anywhere. That's going to be very tight. I don't see that being called today, however.
Okay, well, thank you for that wrap up of the key battleground states. You've been providing that throughout the presidential election show now for the last couple of months, Ryan, and it's nice to be able to conclude with that level of clarity. There's a clear winner, but we've still got final results to come through that will take a while to come through the official channels, but it's been great that you've been able to share the results with us on this channel. Just remind everyone, don't forget to like, to share, to comment, to subscribe, and ring that notification bell. We'll be back with the show, I'm sure, in the coming stages of the ongoing political process that, as Bekki said, will now play out. So it just leaves me to thank Bekki Zorn, the Honourable Michael P. Meehan, and Ryan Hunter for joining us, and of course, as always, our viewers for tuning in. Thank you so much, and take care.